You are killing me by leaving. This is what you're doing to your mother. That is what my mother said to me on a Sunday morning in March, with both hands pressed flat against her chest and her body folding forward from the kitchen chair like she'd been shot. She said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the open window. She said it while my father stood at the counter with his back turned, already reaching for the phone, and she said it because I told her I'd put a deposit on an apartment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to her side. I stood in the kitchen doorway with my hands at my sides, and I watched. Because I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner. I've worked at UPMC Children's Hospital for over a decade. I've seen real cardiac events. I've seen 6-year-olds in genuine distress, their lips going blue, their tiny hands gripping the bed rails while monitors scream behind them. I know what a real emergency looks like. This was not one. If you've ever had a family member use guilt like a weapon to keep you exactly where they wanted you, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me go back. Because this didn't start on a Sunday morning. It started 10 years before that, when I was 23 years old and fresh out of nursing school. My parents own a house in a quiet suburb outside Pittsburgh. Nothing extravagant. 3 bedrooms, a detached garage, and a guest house in the back. A small converted structure with a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. When I graduated and got my first position at UPMC, my mother sat me down and suggested I move into the guest house. She said it made sense. She said I could save money. She said it was temporary, just until I got settled. That was the phrase, just until you get settled. I believed her. I was 23. I didn't know yet that some temporary arrangements are designed to become permanent, and that the people who design them never intend to tell you. The rent started in the first month. $1,800. My mother called it a family contribution. She said it was fair, considering utilities and upkeep. She said it was far less than what I'd pay for an apartment in Shadyside or Lawrenceville. And she was right about that, technically. So I paid it. I paid it the first month, and the second, and the 12th, and the 60th, and I kept paying it because by the time I realized what it actually was, the pattern had cemented itself into the foundation of every interaction I had with my family. But rent was only the beginning. Groceries came next. $420 a month. My mother said it was only fair since I ate dinner at the main house most nights. She never mentioned that I was the one buying the groceries for those dinners. I just absorbed it. Then came the utilities. $310 a month. My share of gas, electric, and internet for the main house. Not the guest house. The main house. A house I didn't live in. I paid it anyway. And then there was Douglas. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He was 19 when I moved into the guest house, and he was 29 the morning my mother pressed her hands to her chest and performed for the paramedics. In those 10 years, Douglas had held a series of jobs that never lasted longer than a season. He lived in the main house. He paid no rent. He contributed nothing to groceries, nothing to utilities, nothing to the mortgage. But he had a car, and that car needed insurance. My mother asked me to cover it when I was 28. Douglas had just lost another job, something in warehouse logistics that he described as beneath him, and his insurance was about to lapse. Patricia said it would only be for a few months, just until he gets on his feet. The same phrase, the same architecture, $247 a month to Erie Insurance, drafted directly from my checking account. He never got on his feet. The draft never stopped. So let me give you the real number, because I kept every receipt. $1,800 a month in rent, $420 in groceries, $310 in utilities, $247 for Douglas's car insurance. That's $2,777 a month. But that wasn't the whole picture. There were appliance repairs I covered without being asked. Douglas's registration fees when they came due. My mother's prescription co-pays that insurance didn't cover. The ones she'd leave on the kitchen counter where I'd see them, never asking directly, just letting them sit there until I picked them up and paid them. Those irregular expenses averaged another $1,145 a month across any given year. The real annual total was $47,000. For 10 years. I know the exact amount because I started tracking it on a spreadsheet when I was 28. The same year Douglas's insurance landed on my account. I kept it on my personal laptop. I never showed it to anyone. I told myself I was keeping records for tax purposes, but that wasn't true. I was keeping records because some part of me already knew that the numbers would matter someday. I just wasn't ready to admit why. $463,000. That is what I gave my family over the course of a decade. Nearly $500,000 from a woman earning $94,000 a year, living in a converted guest house on her parents' property, paying rent to sleep 40 feet from the people who were supposed to love her without a monthly invoice. And the thing that kept me there, the thing that worked every single time, was my mother's health. The first time I searched for apartments, I was 31. I found a 2-bedroom in Bloomfield, reasonable rent, close to the hospital. I mentioned it casually at dinner, not even as a plan, just as an observation. My mother set down her fork. She pressed her fingers to her temple. She said she'd been having dizzy spells. She said the doctor wasn't sure what was causing them. She said she didn't want to worry me, but she wasn't sure she felt safe being alone in the house, not with Gerald working late and Douglas gone most evenings. I dropped the apartment search that night. The second time was 8 months later. I'd found a place in Squirrel Hill. I got as far as requesting an application. I mentioned it on a Saturday morning while helping my mother fold laundry. She paused mid-fold. She put her hand over her heart. She said she'd been having chest flutters. Nothing serious, she said. Probably nothing. But the timing. The way she looked at me. The way her voice dropped to that practiced softness. I didn't fill out the application. I told myself both times that I was being responsible. That I was being a good daughter. That a nurse practitioner doesn't ignore cardiac symptoms in a 61-year-old woman, even vague ones, even ones that conveniently appear and disappear based on proximity to rental listings. I told myself this was simply what family did. But this time, this third time, I didn't mention it casually. I didn't test the waters. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Shadyside. I toured it on a Thursday. I signed the paperwork on a Friday. I put down $2,400, first month plus security deposit, and I drove home knowing that the only thing left was telling them. I told my mother on Sunday morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. Gerald was at the counter, slicing bread for toast. The kitchen smelled like coffee grounds and butter. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think you're safe. I sat down across from her. I kept my voice even. I said I'd found an apartment. I said I'd already signed. I said I'd be moving out within the month. Patricia looked at me. Her expression didn't change for approximately 4 seconds. I counted. 4 seconds of absolutely nothing on her face, and then both hands went to her chest. She tipped forward from the chair. Her knees hit the tile floor. She grabbed the edge of the tablecloth and pulled it sideways, dragging her coffee mug to the edge. She opened her mouth, and the sound that came out was not pain. It was performance. It was loud and sustained and shaped exactly the way a person shapes a sound when they want everyone within earshot to come running. "You are killing me," she said. "You are killing me by leaving. This is what you're doing to your mother." Gerald turned from the counter. He didn't rush to her. He didn't kneel beside her. He looked at her, and then he looked at me, and his expression wasn't fear. It was something else. Something rehearsed. He picked up the phone and dialed 911 with the calm, measured pace of a man who already knew he'd be making this call today. I stayed in the doorway. I didn't move toward her. I didn't move away. I kept my hands still at my sides, and I watched my mother perform distress with the same practiced ease I used to comfort frightened children in the pediatric ward. The breathing pattern was wrong. The hand placement was theatrical. The wailing had rhythm and pacing, not the jagged, uncontrolled gasping of someone whose heart is actually failing. I knew. I had always suspected. But standing there, watching her grip the tablecloth while Gerald spoke calmly to the dispatcher, I knew. Douglas arrived 7 minutes later. He must have been close, maybe at the gas station down the road, maybe already in the driveway. He came through the front door with his phone raised in front of his face, camera already recording. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't check on Patricia. He aimed the lens at me and said, to no one in particular, "I want everyone to see how she reacts in a family crisis." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes after Gerald's call. 2 of them, professional, calm. They brought a stretcher and full cardiac monitoring equipment. They asked Patricia to describe her symptoms. She gave them a performance worthy of an award. Chest tightness, shortness of breath, tingling in her left arm, sudden onset. They ran an EKG. They checked her blood pressure. They clipped a pulse oximeter to her finger. They assessed every symptom she described. They found nothing. Patricia's vitals were normal. Her EKG was clean. Her oxygen saturation was 98%. There was no cardiac event. There was no medical emergency. There was a 61-year-old woman sitting upright on a stretcher in her own kitchen, perfectly composed, arguing with the lead paramedic about whether she needed further observation at the hospital. And Douglas kept filming. He kept his phone raised the entire time, capturing everything. He thought he was building a case against me. Proof that Jillian doesn't care. Proof that Jillian stood in the doorway while her mother was dying. But what he was actually recording was something else entirely. Because at the 11-minute mark of that video, I would watch it 3 times later that evening and I would find the exact moment Gerald leaned close to Patricia on the stretcher. He thought no one was looking. Douglas had the camera pointed toward me, but the angle caught Gerald in the periphery, and his mouth moved. And the audio, when I turned it up that night in the quiet of the guest house, was perfectly clear. Keep it up until she agrees to stay. 6 words. Whispered by my father to my mother while paramedics packed their equipment, and my brother filmed what he thought was my indifference. I stood in that kitchen doorway, watching the paramedics complete their paperwork, and I said nothing. The lead paramedic handed me a copy of the incident report before he left. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The form said everything. Patient: Patricia A. Hargrove. Assessment: no cardiac abnormalities detected. Patient alert: conversational and uncooperative with discharge. I took the report. I folded it once. I walked back to the guest house, the one I'd been paying $1,800 a month to occupy for 10 years, and I closed the door behind me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator I'd paid to replace 2 years ago, and that was the moment something inside me snapped. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table in the guest house with the paramedic report in front of me and my laptop open beside it. The street light outside cut through the blinds in pale, even lines across the floor. The guest house was silent. The main house, 40 feet away, was dark. I read the incident report first. I read it slowly, the way I read patient charts at the hospital. Not for the story, but for the clinical language underneath. Patient alert, conversational, and uncooperative with discharge. I'd written similar notes myself, hundreds of times, about children whose parents insisted something was wrong when every monitor said otherwise. I knew what those words meant when a paramedic chose them. They meant the patient was fine. They meant the emergency was not medical. I set the report on the table and opened Douglas's video. He had posted it to the family group chat at 11:47 that morning with a caption that read, "Everyone should see this." He meant it as an indictment of me. He thought the footage showed a daughter standing motionless in a doorway while her mother suffered. He thought it proved I was cold, heartless, the villain he needed me to be. I watched it once, all the way through, 14 minutes and 31 seconds. Patricia's performance was remarkable from a clinical perspective. Sustained, emotionally modulated, physically committed. She hit every cue: the hand placement, the forward fold, the vocal distress. If I hadn't spent 11 years watching real cardiac events in real patients, I might have believed it myself. I watched it a second time. This time I tracked Gerald. He stayed at the counter for the first 2 minutes. He made the 911 call. He moved to Patricia's side only after the paramedics arrived, not before. He did not touch her while she was on the floor. He did not comfort her. He positioned himself near the stretcher once the crew was working, and he watched. Not her. Me. I watched it a third time. I paused it at the 11-minute mark. Gerald leaned close to Patricia. The camera was aimed at me, but the angle caught him on the left side of the frame, slightly out of focus, but fully audible. I turned the volume up on my laptop. The guest house was so quiet I could hear the compressor cycle in the refrigerator. His voice was low, steady, and completely calm. Keep it up until she agrees to stay. I sat there for a long time after that. I didn't close the laptop. I didn't play the video again. I just sat in the quiet of that guest house, the one I'd moved into at 23 years old, the one I'd paid $216,000 in rent alone to occupy over the course of a decade. and I felt the last thread of doubt I'd been carrying for 10 years dissolve. It wasn't anger. Anger would have come with heat, with noise, with the urge to walk across the yard and confront them. This was something different. It was clarity, cold and complete, like a lens finally clicking into focus after years of looking through smudged glass. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't second-guessing. I wasn't wondering if maybe the dizzy spells at 31 were real, or if the chest flutters at 32 had been genuine symptoms I'd been irresponsible to doubt. They weren't real. None of them were real. They were choreographed. And the paramedic report, sitting 6 inches from my left hand, was the first clinical document in 10 years that confirmed it. Something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I'd saved 3 months earlier when a colleague at UPMC mentioned an attorney she trusted. Someone who handled family civil matters with discretion and precision. I hadn't called him then. I hadn't been ready. I was ready now. I set an alarm for 7 the next morning. I turned off the ringer on my phone. I went to bed in the guest house I'd been paying $1,800 a month to sleep in, and I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. At 7:04 a.m. on Monday, I called Stuart Allen Cooper. His office answered on the second ring. I gave my name. I was transferred within 90 seconds. Stuart Cooper's voice was measured and direct, the kind of voice that doesn't waste words, which I appreciated immediately because I didn't have any to waste either. I told him what happened. I kept it factual. I described the Sunday morning conversation. I described Patricia's collapse. I described the paramedic assessment. I described Douglas's video. I described Gerald's whisper at the 11-minute mark. I described the 10 years of financial support. I did not editorialize. I did not cry. I gave him information the way I give shift reports at the hospital, organized, complete, and stripped of anything that wasn't clinically relevant. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. "Do you have copies of the video and the incident report?" I said yes. "Send them to me before this call ends." I opened my email on the laptop while still on the phone. I attached the video file Douglas had posted to the group chat. I attached a photograph of the paramedic incident report. I'd taken it with my phone the night before, both sides, in clear lighting. And then I attached one more file. The spreadsheet, 10 years of monthly entries, every rent payment, every grocery receipt, every utility check, every insurance draft, every copay, every appliance repair. $463,000, documented line by line. I hit send. Stuart was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll have a draft filing by Wednesday. This is a civil harassment restraining order under the Protection from Abuse framework. The simulated medical emergency, combined with the video evidence and the documented financial coercion pattern, gives us a strong basis. I'll name both parents in the filing." I said, "What about Douglas?" Stuart paused. "Was he part of the staged event?" "He filmed it. He distributed the footage to pressure me. But he didn't direct the performance." "No." "Then we focus the order on the orchestrators. Patricia and Gerald. Douglas's footage becomes our primary exhibit. If he contacts you after the order is in place, we revisit." I agreed. We ended the call. 4 days later, Thursday afternoon, Stuart filed the civil harassment restraining order in Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas. The filing referenced the video, the incident report, and the spreadsheet as contextual evidence of a sustained pattern of coercive control. He cited the simulated medical emergency specifically, a staged cardiac event designed to prevent the petitioner from exercising her legal right to independent housing. I was at work when the order was granted. Saturday morning. I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift at UPMC Children's, reviewing discharge paperwork for a 7-year-old recovering from a respiratory infection. My phone buzzed once in my scrub pocket. I didn't check it until I finished the chart. The text was from Stuart Cooper. It was time-stamped 11:14 a.m. "Served at 11:14 a.m., you're clear." I read it once. I put my phone back in my pocket. I finished my shift. That evening, Renee Mitchell called me from her car in the hospital parking garage. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew, because I told her about the apartment and the restraining order filing earlier that week, standing in the break room at the end of a night shift while the coffee machine cycled. Renee had listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without judgment, without trying to fix anything. Now, on the phone, she said one thing. "You did the right thing, Jillian." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I know." 3 days after the order was served, I moved. I didn't do it in a rush. I didn't hire movers or make a production of it. I packed methodically across 3 evenings. Clothes, books, kitchen items, the personal laptop with 10 years of records on it. I carried each box to my car and drove it to the Shadyside apartment. 4 trips, 12 boxes, 1 lamp, 1 set of towels I'd bought for myself 6 years ago and never used because the guest house had come furnished. On the last trip, I stood in the guest house and looked at the empty bedroom. The mattress stayed. It belonged to my parents. The nightstand stayed, the curtains stayed. Everything that was theirs remained exactly where it had always been. Everything that was mine fit in the trunk of a Honda Civic. I walked out. I pulled the door shut behind me. It closed softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the latch settling into the frame. I did not look back at the main house. I did not check to see if anyone was watching from the kitchen window. I did not pause in the driveway. I put my keys in the ignition, and the engine started with a low, steady hum. I pulled out into the street, and the guest house shrank in the rearview mirror until the road curved and it was gone. My phone sat on the passenger seat. It did not buzz. The restraining order was 3 days old. Patricia and Gerald could not call. They could not text. They could not drive to UPMC and find me in the ward. They could not knock on the guest house door at 9 p.m. with a prescription copay left casually on the counter. For the first time in 10 years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. The Shadyside apartment was quiet when I unlocked the door that final evening. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced a row of trees. The deposit had been $2,400, first month in security, and it was the only money I'd spent on housing that month that didn't go to someone else's mortgage. I set the last box on the kitchen counter. I didn't unpack it. I stood at the window and looked at the trees and the streetlight below them, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Relief. Not joy, not triumph. Relief. Like exhaling after holding your breath for a decade and finally remembering what your lungs were built to do. The door to the guest house was closed. The door to the apartment was open. And between them, a restraining order and 463,000 reasons I was never going back. The first week was quiet in a way I didn't trust. I kept waiting for the knock. The voicemail. The cousin who shows up unannounced with a casserole and a message from your mother. But the restraining order held. Stuart Cooper had drafted it with the kind of precision that left no ambiguity. No contact at the apartment, no contact at UPMC Children's Hospital, no calls, no texts, no electronic messages, no third-party communication initiated at their direction. Patricia and Gerald Hargrove were, for the first time in 33 years, unable to reach me. I unpacked slowly. A box a night, sometimes 2. I hung the towels I'd bought 6 years ago and never used. I made coffee in a kitchen where no one had left a prescription copay on the counter. I slept in a bedroom where the rent went to a landlord who had never staged a cardiac event in the kitchen. 3 weeks passed. I learned later, through Renee, who heard it from a mutual acquaintance at a church in the old neighborhood, that the first month after I left was defined not by grief, but by accounting. The $2,777 monthly contribution I'd been making simply stopped. There was no dramatic cancellation, no phone call where I announced the end of funding. The direct draft to Erie Insurance for Douglas's car policy lapsed on the 15th of the month because I'd canceled the automatic withdrawal the same week I moved. The grocery budget at the main house, which had been supplemented by my $420 monthly contribution for a decade, contracted overnight. The utility bills arrived at the end of the month the way they always did, except now there was no check from the guest house to absorb $310 of the total. And the rent, the $1,800 a month that Patricia had called a family contribution for 10 years, was gone. Not reduced, gone. The guest house sat empty. No tenant, no income, just a converted structure in the backyard with a mattress and curtains that belonged to my parents and nothing else. The first thing to go was Douglas's car insurance. Gerald told him in April, roughly 6 weeks after I moved out, that he and Patricia could not continue covering the $247 monthly premium. Douglas, who had been living rent-free in the main house for his entire adult life, responded the way Douglas always responded when confronted with a cost he had never personally absorbed. He argued. He insisted it wasn't fair. He said someone needed to call Jillian and fix this. Gerald reminded him that calling Jillian was, at that point, a violation of a court order. Douglas let the policy lapse. He drove without insurance for 3 weeks before a state trooper pulled him over on Route 28 for an expired inspection sticker and discovered the lapse. The fine was $300. The reinstatement fee from Erie Insurance was $175. The new premium, without my account history anchoring the policy, jumped to $247 a month. Gerald paid it. He paid it the way he'd paid for everything Douglas ever needed, silently, resentfully, and without any expectation that Douglas would contribute. By June, the compounding had begun. Patricia's prescription copays, the ones she'd been leaving on the kitchen counter for me to find for years, were now coming directly out of the household budget. The total varied by month, but the average was $385, not catastrophic on its own. But added to Douglas's insurance, the full utility burden, the groceries without my supplement, and the mortgage payment that had always been manageable because $1,800 of guest house rent had quietly subsidized it every month. The math stopped working. I know the numbers because Stuart Cooper had included my 10-year spreadsheet in the restraining order filing, and Patricia's attorney, she retained one briefly in May, trying to contest the order, was required to respond to the financial context. Stuart shared the response with me. Patricia's lawyer had argued that the financial relationship was voluntary and therefore irrelevant to the harassment claim. The judge disagreed. The order stood. But the financial disclosure Patricia's attorney had filed in the response revealed something I hadn't known. Gerald and Patricia's monthly mortgage payment was $1,640. Their combined monthly income from Gerald's pension and Patricia's part-time bookkeeping work was $4,100. Before I left, my $2,777 in contributions had brought the household's effective monthly income to $6,877. Without it, they were operating on $4,100 a month with a mortgage of $1,640, utilities averaging $780, groceries for 3 adults, Douglas's car insurance, Patricia's prescriptions, and every incidental expense that I had been quietly absorbing for a decade. The shortfall was approximately $1,900 a month, $22,800 a year. They tried to close the gap. Gerald, who was 64 and had been semi-retired for 3 years, went back to work. He took a part-time position at a hardware store in Monroeville, $14.50 an hour, 22 hours a week. It brought in roughly $1,276 a month before taxes. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. Patricia attempted to increase her bookkeeping hours, but the clients she'd maintained were part-time accounts that didn't have additional work to offer. She picked up 2 new clients in July, small businesses that needed quarterly reconciliation, but the additional income was sporadic. Some months it added $400. Some months it added nothing. By August, Douglas was told he needed to start paying rent. The conversation, relayed to me months later through the same acquaintance network, did not go well. Douglas had never paid rent in his life. He had never paid for groceries. He had never covered a utility bill. He had spent 29 years in that house contributing nothing, and the suggestion that he begin was received as a personal attack. He told Gerald it was Jillian's fault. He said if Gerald hadn't whispered that stupid thing on camera, none of this would have happened. Gerald, according to the account I received, said nothing. He sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands. His silence wasn't neutral. It was the same silence it had always been. Permission. Except now there was no one left to permit it toward. Douglas took a job in September, a warehouse position, the same kind of work he'd once described as beneath him. He worked second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. at a distribution center near the airport. He earned $16.75 an hour. He complained about it constantly. He paid $400 a month in rent to his own parents, which was the number Gerald had settled on after Douglas refused the original figure of $700. Even with Douglas's rent, the household shortfall persisted. The numbers didn't lie. They never had. I'd been tracking them for 10 years on a spreadsheet no one ever asked to see. Somewhere in October, the neighbors started noticing. The lawn, which Gerald had always maintained with fastidious regularity, grew uneven. The exterior paint on the guest house, empty now for 7 months, began peeling near the gutters. Patricia's car, a 2016 Ford Escape with 94,000 miles, developed a transmission issue that the local mechanic estimated would cost $2,800 to repair. They didn't repair it. Patricia began driving Gerald's truck. Gerald began taking the bus to the hardware store in Monroeville. The acquaintance who relayed most of this information, a woman named Joan who attended the same church as Patricia, told Renee that Patricia had stopped coming to Sunday services in November. No explanation given. Joan assumed it was embarrassment. The Hargrove family had presented themselves for decades as stable, comfortable, close-knit. The restraining order was public record. The guest house was visibly empty, and the daughter who had been quietly funding the entire operation for 10 years was gone. 8 months after I moved out, the Hargrove household was operating at a deficit that no amount of hardware store shifts or quarterly bookkeeping could close. The $47,000 annual contribution I'd been providing wasn't supplemental. It was structural. And when I removed it, the structure didn't crack dramatically. It sagged. Slowly, unevenly, in the places where the support had been invisible for so long that no one remembered it was there. I did not seek this information. I did not drive past the house. I did not ask Renee to ask Joan. The details arrived the way neighborhood details always arrive, through proximity and human nature. And I received them without satisfaction, without vindication, and without guilt. I received them with clarity. 1 year after I moved into the Shady Side apartment, I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning in March and made coffee in a French press I'd bought for myself. The window was open. The trees along the street had started budding, pale green against the gray Pittsburgh sky. The apartment was quiet. Not the heavy quiet of the guest house, where silence always carried the weight of proximity to people who had turned my competence into their income. This was a different kind of quiet. It was clean. My phone sat on the counter. It did not buzz. It had not buzzed with a Hargrove number in 12 months. The restraining order had been renewed without contest. Stuart Cooper had handled the paperwork in February. Patricia and Gerald did not appear at the hearing. I had received a raise at UPMC in January, a 4% cost of living adjustment that brought my salary to $97,760. It was the first raise in 10 years that I experienced as an actual increase in my quality of life, because for the first time, 100% of my income was mine. No family rent, no grocery supplements, no utility shares, no car insurance for a 29-year-old brother who had never once said thank you. The $47,000 I'd been redirecting to the Hargrove household was now in my savings account, my retirement fund, and the kitchen of an apartment where the only name on the lease was mine. Renee came over that Saturday afternoon. She brought scones from a bakery on Walnut Street and a card that said nothing on the front and on the inside, in her handwriting, said, "Proud of you, always was." We sat in the living room and ate scones and talked about work. She told me about a new resident who kept mislabeling IV lines. I told her about a 6-year-old patient who had drawn me a picture of a cat wearing a stethoscope. We laughed. The apartment smelled like coffee and butter and spring air through an open window. At one point, Renee set her scone down and looked at me. She said, "You look different." I said, "Different how?" She thought about it. "Like you're not bracing for something." I didn't respond right away. I looked at the window and the trees, and the light coming through the glass, and I thought about the guest house 40 feet from a kitchen, where my mother had pressed both hands to her chest and performed a cardiac emergency she'd rehearsed with my father the way other families rehearse fire drills. I thought about the spreadsheet. $463,000, 10 years. A decade of rent and groceries and utilities and insurance premiums and prescription copays and appliance repairs, paid faithfully by a daughter who told herself every single month that this was simply what family did. It wasn't what family did, it was what I did. And I stopped. Some doors close so better ones can open. That's not a metaphor. The guest house door closed with a soft click on a Tuesday evening in March. The apartment door opened with a key that belonged only to me, and between them, a paramedic report, a restraining order, and the first full breath I'd taken in 10 years. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about recognizing when love is a performance and knowing when to walk away, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.